Hey everybody, this is Bandor Tyrell again, and I'm going to be doing a series of videos on beginners building in Second Life. I've been playing around a lot and talking to people, and I thought it might be a good idea to kind of give my perspective on building things. I've got a lot of experience building sims, decorating them, landscaping, building objects, and doing mesh and animations and all that too. So this is going to be just basic building with prims to start with. Then we'll move on to some other things as we go along. I'm going to work on some tips and tricks along the way to teach you kind of how to take advantage of stuff and use the tools that we have to get the best results. So let's start off with just the basics about building. So one of the cool things about Second Life is that everybody who uses Second Life has the ability to create just about anything you can imagine. It comes with a full set of tools to let you construct, edit, modify, to fulfill whatever you have in your imagination. The tools are pretty basic and pretty simple to use once you get used to them. There are some things about them that can be kind of confusing, especially when you get into things like texturing. But generally speaking, it's a stripped down set of functions that you might have in any kind of 3D modeling software. But it uses things called primitive shapes, which are pre-made 3D objects that Second Life made for us and that they give us access to. We call those prims. So whenever you hear the term prim, it's referring to one of the primitive shapes. And so in your menu, you can go to the build menu, and then underneath the build menu you can select build again, or you can just hit Control B from your keyboard to pull up the build panel, and that's this panel. Let's talk about it a little bit. When it first opens up, it has the kind of magic wand looking button selected, which is the create button, to allow you to create the different primitive shapes, and here they are. So you have a cube, a prism, which is like a fat triangle. You have a pyramid. Then you have what is a tetrahedron, which is kind of like a pyramid but different. And I'll show you all these. We'll res them all and play with them. Cylinder, kind of a half cylinder called a hemicylinder. There's a cone. There's a half a cone called a hemicone. There's a sphere, and then a half sphere, which they called a hemisphere. A torus, which is like a big ring. This is a tube. This is, I think I call it, a ring, which we'll talk about these in a minute, what the differences are. Then it has a tree, which I don't think I've ever used ring. I may have used ring once, I don't know. But I've never used the tree, and I've certainly never used the grass before. Maybe we'll play with that and see what it does. But you can click on any one of these, and then you can just, you get the little magic wand. You can see it over my black t-shirt better. You get a magic wand tool, and then you just point at the ground anywhere you want and click, and you have now created that object in Second Life. We call that resing the object. So you've resed a cube. When you do that, you'll get these handles on it. Some people call it a gizmo. It's a handle that lets you manipulate the object, and there's 3 ways you can typically manipulate a 3D object. In a lot of 3D software, they call it transformation. So the ways you can transform the object. The first way is to move it. And so this gizmo has these 3 different handles, blue, red, green, that correspond to the 3 different axes on the 3D model, which is the x-axis, which is the red, the y-axis, which is the green, and the blue axis, which is z, for up and down. And to move an object, you just grab one of these handles and pull or slide the object where you want it to go. This is moving it strictly on the x-axis. The green one moves it on the y-axis, and the blue one moves it up and down on the z-axis. You can also use these, which kind of do combinations of things. And if you look over it with your camera, you'll see there's another one over here too, which lets you do things, moves on 2 axes at one time instead of just the one. But I never use those. So that's the move tool, the move gizmo. You also see that it's active because I have the radio button for move selected. If I were to click down to the next one, then it switches to a different kind of gizmo. This is the rotate gizmo, and it still has the same 3 axes. There's the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis. And it works in a similar way. So you just click on the axis that you want and then just pull it one way or the other to rotate your object. This is rotating it on the z-axis. Then this rotates it on the x-axis, and this rotates it on the y-axis. The third one is called stretch. In a lot of 3D software, that's called scale. So you click on the radio button next to stretch, and you get a different set of handles. On this gizmo, again, there's still the x, the y, and the z-axis, but there's also one on each corner of this object, which kind of lets you move everything at one time and stretch the whole thing. So to stretch an object, you just basically grab the handle that you want. So if I wanted to stretch this in the x direction, you just grab it and pull, and you make this thing bigger. If I wanted to make it taller, I would use that one, and if I want to make it fatter, I would use this one. Now, if I want to keep the same relative proportional size and adjust it, I can grab this and on the corner, the white one, and it makes the entire object bigger or smaller and keeps the proportions the same. And they all do the same thing. All right, so that's the 3 basic move transformations that you can make. You have move, rotate, and stretch. That's the basics of it. Now there's another thing on here that is very critical that you understand, and that is the grid and how to snap to the grid when you make changes. So if you go up to your build menu and you go down to options, you can have a bunch of different build options. So if you look at, there's all these different ones, and most of them I never touch. So the one that is important is snap to grid. You can toggle that on and off by hitting G. I leave it on because it makes things easier to build. So right now I've got this. Oh, let me go back and tell you some other things too. So when you have the item selected, by default, when you pick something and you edit it, it automatically goes into move mode. I can get to the rotate by hitting the radio button and changing to these handles, or to stretch mode by clicking the radio button here and getting these handles. But there's a faster and easier way to do both of those. So if you have the object selected and you have your move handles showing, you can just hold down the control key and you get the rotate handles. And then when you let go of the control key, it goes back to the move. So this is much faster than coming over here and clicking the radio button and then having to come back and click the radio button on move to move it back. So you'll be doing this so often that it's just faster for you if you use the control key. So control, rotate it how you want it. And you can also do control plus shift, and it gives you the stretch. Strangely enough, I don't really use that one. I don't know why. Very rarely do I use that. Because I think it's because I don't really stretch things. I don't stretch things that often, and when I do, it's easier for me just to come up here and click the button. But anyway, control shift gives you the stretch handles. So now I've got this object really at a weird angle, and it's not very it's not where I want it to be, and it would be very difficult for me to go back and manually adjust these, right? So get it right where I want. Well, that's where the snapping on the grid comes in handy. So in each one of these, I'll do rotate first. So in each one of these different movement options, move, rotate, and stretch, you have the ability to snap to the grid. And so if you notice when I hold down the control key and I get the handles and I click and hold on to one of these handles, you see the ring, not the red ring, but the white ring that appears around it. And it says up at the top, down at the bottom, north on the right side, and it should say south on that side. That's kind of the snap to thing. And in between there, you'll see there are angles. So while I'm holding this down, I can just, as long as I keep my cursor in the middle here, I can rotate freely. It's very smooth and I can rotate freely. But if I pull my cursor out while I'm holding it down, so I've got control held down and I've got my left mouse button held down. If I move my cursor out until I come to this white ring, you'll notice an arrow appears and it points to the marks on this ring, and it snaps as I go around it. It snaps from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and that lets me snap to sort of the cardinal points and fixed angles in between. So if I go all the way up to up, now the x-axis is back oriented at the at the 0 point, the starting point. And if I do the same thing with the green one, and I can snap that around and go back all the way straight up to the top. Now it's level again. It's not at a weird angle. It's rotated on the z-axis a bit, so if I want to, I can pull that and then snap it to one of the grid points. So you have north, east, south, and west. And then, depending on that, you'll have 0, 90, 180, and 270 degrees on the compass. And then in between you have, this is a 45-degree angle from say west to this kind of northwest position. That's a 45-degree angle. Then you can have a 22.5-degree angle, and then it breaks that down into smaller segments as well. So I like to work with things oriented on the grid, so it's oriented in a northwest southeast kind of fashion. At least when I start, because it's much easier to do that than working on something that's kind of catty corner at an angle. So that's how you get it back to where you want it. The other thing you can do is you can go to the Object tab, and it will show you the parameters for all of the things that you're adjusting here with the move, the rotate, and the stretch. So for example, position corresponds to move, size corresponds to stretch, and rotation corresponds to rotate. I don't know why they put them in different order here. This is move, rotate, stretch. You would think it would be move, rotate, stretch, but it's not. It's move, stretch, rotate. Anyway, so you can adjust this. The size, you can just sit here and click up and down on this, and you'll actually do the same thing as moving the handles, but it does it in steps. You can also clear this out and put in a number of your choice, like let's just say 1 meter. Everything's in meters. So 1.000000. It's got like 5 levels of precision there. So that's 1 meter. And if I want it to be 1 meter by 1 meter, I can just go and I can tab through those, put 1 on all of them, right? And now it's 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. And you'll notice it's at 0 degrees, 0 degrees, 0 degrees on all 3 axes. If I were to rotate this, and the way to rotate it exactly 45 degrees is you grab the blue, you pull it out to the axis, one of the 90-degree axis, which is the east, northeast, south, and west, and pull to the one that's in between, and that's 45 degrees. But it depends on where you started from, because it's, so like this is actually 45 degrees. But if I were to go from here to here, now it'll be 90 degrees. So it's oriented, and you can't tell because it's a cube with wood paneling on all 4 sides, so it looks the same. But putting it back over here, now it's 0, 0, 0. And you can do the same thing here. If I wanted to turn this at 17.25 degrees, boom, I could do that. If I want to go back to 0, just hit 0 and go back. Another thing, the position up here is relative to world space. So it's where this object is on this sim. So the sims are 256 by 256 meters. They start at 0 in the x-axis and 0 on the y-axis in one corner, and they go all the way over to like 255 by 255 on the far corner. The middle of the sim is 128 by 128. So it's 128 on the x-axis, 128 on the y-axis. And this just tells you where this cube is physically located. So then you have controls next to each one of these: position, size, and rotations for copying and pasting the values that are in here. So let's say I wanted to move this cube, but when I'm done, I want to put it back where it was originally. Well, you could do undo, but that's dangerous because if you move it more than once, you can't do it anymore. So I could just go, oh, let's move it over here, and then hit Control Z, and it goes back where I was. So you do have a little bit of undo capability, but a better way to do it is just come over here and click the C, and that copies all three of these parameters from position. The C next to position copies the three parameters from position. The C next to size copies all three parameters for the size, and the C next to rotation copies all three for rotation. So now that I've copied the position, I can move it wherever I want to. I can move it over here, I can move it over there, I can pull it up, and then I go, okay, now I want to put it back where it was. You just come down here and click the bottom P. So you could, according to this, you can push either of them. This one, I really don't know the difference between these. I never use the middle one. I always use the bottom one. The bottom one says paste from the clipboard, and this one just says paste position, whatever that position is. And I'm assuming that's the position where it was before. So I never use the middle one. Feel free to use it. If you know more about it, you can leave comments. But I just use the bottom one. So click the bottom one, and it goes, oops, didn't work. Why didn't it work? Oh, because I hit C again. I must have copied it again. So, okay, we'll just come back over here. Oh, because I didn't have this object selected. That's why. I had my wood floor selected. Okay, so let's do that again. So here we are. We're going to move this. But before we move it, let's copy its position. So we'll make sure we have the right object selected, which I didn't again. So it's kind of hard to tell with this wood. Let me change the color of this wood. So all right, so let's select our cube. And if, like that, I had edit closed, so clicking on it, you can't really do anything with it. So you have to right click and hit edit. All right, so right click on it and hit edit, gives you back the build panel. And we can go back to object. And then we can make sure it's selected. You have a yellow light highlight around it, means it's selected. Hit copy, move it where you want to, and then just hit paste. And it comes back. Move it again, hit paste. Because I've copied it and it's still copied, so I can do that as often as I want. That's very helpful. I use that all the time. Okay. If I want to keep this rotation and then I want to test something and say, oh, what would it look like if I rotated it? I can copy the rotation, I can rotate it, and then go, yeah, no, I don't like that, I want to go back, and then just hit the P and it goes right back to where it was. So that's how to copy and paste the changes that you have. Okay, so I talked a little bit about that. I talked about the grid on rotating, but I didn't talk about snapping to the grid for the other two. So let's talk about move. So again, right click, pick edit, it comes back to this panel. Let's go, we're in the move mode because we have the move gizmo. Now if I left click and hold down on one of these handles, you get the grid here, and it's based on the orientation of the handle that I'm using. So I'm using the red x-axis handle here, which allows me to move along the x-axis, and it's showing like a ruler. Looks kind of like a ruler, right? And I can pull the cursor down or up until I reach one side of this ruler, and then you get an arrow and you can snap to the individual increments that are in there right now, like that. Boom, 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 boom. And that just gives you some precision in movement so that you can line things up easier and you can put things where you want them. Notice there are no numbers or indications down on the bottom side of where this is on the grid. It just kind of lets you quickly move things like one snap at a time or a bunch of snaps or whatever. But if I pull this up to the top, you'll notice there are numbers up there. And this is where it is on that axis in this sim. So you'll notice this is 187.5 meters. This is 188 meters. So that means over that way, 188 meters is the edge of the sim. So you can snap to these, and then when you snap to one of the numbered values like this, it turns brighter white. It's hard to see here, but it actually does light up a little bit so you know you're on it. So this is 187.5 meters. If you want to make sure, you can just let go and then look in here. Oops, I wasn't on 187.5. There you go. Now you know. There. 187.5. Sometimes it's hard to tell. And you can zoom in and let me move my camera a little bit. You can zoom in and you get a better view. And also the precision changes when you zoom in. So now it has increments of 0.25 with numbers on it, and this is 0.125. So 187 to 187.25, 187.5. And you can see it lighting up better now. When they pull the camera back, it's hard to see. So now it's on 187. You can do the same thing on all three axes. So that was 1. If I do the y-axis, I can then do this, and now this is 102. So now I know my cube is sitting at 187 by 102. And if I look in my editor over here, on my object panel, you can actually see it says 187 on the x and 102 on the y-axis. It's currently sitting at 2501.598 blah 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 888 meters. You can also snap the z-axis if you want to put it on a specific altitude. You can say, okay, just put this one, snap it to right there. I can barely read that. There, 2502. Where's 2501? Oh, 2501's underneath my board, so I'm not going to do that. Let's put it at 2502 just for now, right there. I like nice round numbers. All right, so now you know about using the grid and snapping to the grid for movement. Last one is scaling. Okay, we did rotation. Let's do scaling as well. So stretch, you have this, and as you pull, you can see there are, oh, this is the one I already did. I showed you this already. So there's a ruler on the top and the bottom. The top ruler has numbers, and again, as you move over the ones with numbers on top, they highlight. So I already showed you that. Let's talk about rotation. So rotation. Oh, I think I showed you all three of them. So this is rotation. Boom, 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 boom. This is stretching, and this is move. Okay, so that's how to snap to the grid on all of those. Now, you might not like the granularity of the snapping ability, so you can change it by going up to Build, Options, and then go down to Grid Options. And then in here, you can set, I think by default, the value in, it says unit meters, but that's really kind of dumb. That's not what it is. This is how precise. This is the unit in meters of the white lines on the grid for scaling, for stretching, and for moving. It's in 0.125. I think by default it's 0.25. I changed this to 0.125 to give me more precision. For some of the stuff that I do, I like to have it at 0.125, and I recommend you do that too. It gives you a little bit more snappiness, more precision than a quarter of a meter every time you want to make a change. And then this angle is at 1 degree increments. So if you want to change that, you could. You could also do snap to subunits. You could just say view cross sections. I never use that, so I don't know what it does. And then the opacity is the opacity of the grid markers. So if they're too transparent, you can come in here and adjust them so you can see them better than what they are. So like right now, if I were to pull this up, you can see what it looks like. If I move that all the way over, you can pull it up and you can see it's darker now. And if I pull this way to the left, it's almost invisible. So I usually keep it all the way over because I want to see it. So okay, so Now let's see what we've talked about. Oh yeah, here's another important thing you need to know when you're doing stretching. So stretching, I have this checkbox turned on right now. That's why it behaved the way it did. It's called stretch both sides. Okay, I also have a thing on called stretch textures, which doesn't really apply right now because we don't have any textures on here, but it will later. And then I have snap turned on. If I didn't have snap turned on, it wouldn't snap to the grid. So you want snap turned on. You don't have to have stretch both sides on. It depends on what you want to do. And I'll show you the difference. So this is stretching. So here we go, stretching. And you'll notice that when I do this, it stretches both the left and the right exactly the same amount. So if I start with a 1 meter box, right, 1 meter cube on the y-axis, and I pull this to 2 meters, I now have a 2 meter wide cube centered on the same place it was when it was 1 meter. It's the center point, the origin point hasn't moved because I'm stretching both sides. And also, when I have stretch both sides turned on and you do the white thing, it does the same thing. It stretches the top and the bottom. Now, if I turn off stretch both sides, it's only going to stretch the side of the handle that you grab. So if I grab the left side on the y-axis and pull, now you notice the right side stays put. If I grab the right one and stretch it, you notice the left side stays put. Now, I'm no longer at the same place where I was before. My center of origin has moved because I was only moving one side. So you'll notice that we're currently on the x-axis, we're currently sitting at 183 meters. So if I pull this over like this and move it like this, now we're sitting at 181.125 meters because the center of the cube has moved. And that can be important at times. You need to be aware of that. You don't always want to stretch both sides. Sometimes you definitely want to stretch just one side, like where this is beneficial. One of the ways in which this is beneficial, let me show you. I'll delete this cube. So just hit the delete key when it's selected. Have it selected and hit the delete key. Now I'm going to res another one. When you res things, it reses it on a surface. So you'll notice that it's sitting on top of that wood. If you're on the linden ground and you res something, it reses it right on top of the ground. Now, if I'm going to stretch the top, say I want to make this half as tall, I could do it. In fact, I'm going to clone this. Before we talk about that, let me talk about how to clone something. So if I want to make a copy of this, I could pick it up to my inventory, and then I could res it from my inventory, because this is just an object, right? In fact, it's called object is the name of this object. But that's kind of a pain in the ass. I have to pick it up and res another one. SL gives you the ability to just make a copy of this right here, as long as you have the permissions to do it. And I created this, so I do have the permissions. You can just pick one of the move axes, and in this case, I'm going to do the green one because I want it to go left and right. You hold the shift key down and left click and drag the thing, and it drags you a copy. So now I have two identical cubes. You can do that on any of the axes. So there I have 3 of them, but let's get rid of that. I only need 2. All right, so what I want to show you is why sometimes you don't want to have stretch both sides on. So if I turn stretch both sides on for this one, and I'm going to go stretch it, and I want to make it half as tall. So it's currently 1 meter tall, right? No, it's a half a meter tall. And I want to make it 0.25 meters tall. I can grab the top axis handle, sorry, not axis. I can grab the top handle and pull this down until I have 0.25 on the ruler here. So now I know it's 0.25 meters tall, and I can look in here and I can see under the size parameters, it says on the z-axis it is 0.25 meters tall. I can do the same thing on this one, but I'm going to turn stretch both sides off. So now I'm going to grab the top and I'm going to pull it down to 0.25. Do you see the difference? The one on the left is still on the floor. It's still sitting on top of this. This one's floating in the air. So that's another thing you got to be careful with. If you don't want to have to worry about what height this is at, and you want it on the floor and you want to stay on the floor, you want to make sure you avoid doing the stretch both sides because it will change the center of origin and it will be floating in the air. So that's something to keep in mind. That's one of my little tips. Anyway, so that's, let's see, what else is there in here to talk about for the basics of move, rotate, stretch right now. I think that covers it. So to reiterate, when you, I was going to go through all the different prims. So let's reiterate first before I move on. So to res an object, you go to the Create button at the top. You then select the primitive that you want to res. In this case, we're going to res the cube. So you make sure it's highlighted. And then you just point your magic wand tool, the Create tool, where you want it to res, and you click and it reses. Then you have three ways to manipulate this. You have Move, which gives you the arrow handles, and you can move it among three different axes. The red is X, the green is Y, and the blue is Z. You have the ability to rotate. If you click on rotate, or from Move, hold down the control key. Either way, just hold down the control key, and when you let go, it goes back to move, or click rotate. And then you can rotate it along the red X, green Y, and blue Z axes. And I just undid all my changes. And then the third one is stretch, and you can get to it by clicking stretch. Or if you have move selected, you do Control plus Shift and hold that down, and you get the axes. And then again, you can stretch it based on by grabbing a handle and pulling it on either the X red axis, the Y green axis, or the blue Z axis. And you have a choice of doing it to stretch both sides thusly, or to stretch just one side like this. And it's up to you which one you do. It depends on what you're building and what you need to do at the time. There was something else I just thought about. Stretch both sides, stretch. I can't remember. It was something popped into my head and I was about to say it and I held off. Probably shouldn't have held off. Okay, so that's the basics of move, rotate, and stretch. Oh yeah, the last thing was the grid. Don't forget about snapping to the grid. So if you're moving something, pull the cursor up until the arrows appear and they go to the ruler, and then you can snap to these increments. And normally it's 0.25 meters, but I have mine set to 0.125, so you get the one in between. And you can set it to whatever you want it to. In Build, Options, Grid Options. Okay, so that is a cube. Now, the other primitives, let's talk about them really quickly before we end this. So that was a cube. The next one is the prism. It looks like this. It is a right triangle that has been made wide. And now with this one, you can do the same things. You can move it, like I'm doing right now. You can rotate it, like I'm doing now. And you can stretch it. And now when you stretch it, it changes shape. So as it gets longer this way, it kind of elongates the triangle, the angles of the triangle change. You can do stretch both sides, or you can do stretch one side, just like on the other one. And you can change my camera angle over here. You can stretch this and it gets like a really wide ramp now, see? And then if you do the Z, you lower the angle of it. So you can make ramps like this very simply. Or you can build anything like a roof. If you wanted to make a roof, this is kind of half a roof, right? And then, so that's the prism. The next primitive is the pyramid. And it is a square base, so there's 4 sides to the base. And a point at the top. So it's kind of like the pyramids of Giza, except this one's long and it's very tall, right? But the same controls work, so you can move it on 3 axes. You can rotate it on the same 3 axes. Oops, snap back to there. and you can stretch it. Oops. Stretch it this way, stretch it this way, or stretch it this way. Now we have a very short, fat pyramid. But it's still a pyramid. Next one is the tetrahedron. It's like a pyramid, except instead of the bottom being a square, the bottom is a triangle. But again, you can move it, same thing. You can rotate it, and you can scale it. Next one is cylinder. And so the three most commonly used prims for me are the cube, the cylinder, and the sphere. So this is probably the second most used one. It's flat on the top and flat on the bottom, and has a circle. It's a circle that's been stretched, right? So if I were to make this really, really flat by picking stretch and stretching it all the way down to nothing, now it looks like a circle, right? But I can stretch it where I want. So it's like a can. You can think of it, and some people call these cans, right? So it's kind of a can. There's more things you can do with these, which I'll talk about in the next video. This is just the basics of primitives. The next video we'll talk about what you can do with them and how you can manipulate them, because there's a whole bunch of things you can do to them. All right, so again, you can move it. Same things. You can move it, you can rotate it, and you can stretch it. So if I want to make it that way, if I want to make it, so it's round right now, right? It's round because if you look at the size, the X and Y size parameters are the same. And as long as those are the same, it's going to be a circle. If I were to stretch this and make one side longer, like that, you can see now it's different in here. It's no longer a circle. It's an ellipse. And now I have an elliptical cylinder, right? And so I can put that back where it was, and now it's back to being circular. Okay, that's a cylinder. Cylinders are good for making pipes, for making anything that looks cylindrical. I know that was a joke. And this is a hemisphere. It's a half a sphere. So anything that you want to do with a half pipe, you can do with a hemisphere. Next one, and the same controls work on all these. So this is, I'm not going to go through all of them on every single one. This is a cone. Cone's probably the fourth most usable thing. You can use it for quite a bit. You can make an ice cream cone out of it. In fact, maybe I'll do that before we're done. The next one is the hemicone. What do they call that? Yeah, it is a hemicone. It's a half a cone, so it's flat on this side. Oops. I'm trying to change my camera and I'm moving it instead. So it looks like a cone from this side, but it's flat from this side. And then the next one is the sphere. Sphere's probably the second or third most used primitive that you'll get, and it's just a ball. You can think of it as a ball. So if you want a ball, you can make it a ball. It's round. Now, again, because it's round, all three of these parameters need to be the same for size. So it's the same size on the X, the Y, and the Z axis makes it a perfectly round sphere. If you were to change any of those by stretching, now it's no longer perfectly round. Now it's kind of like a lozenge, like a pill or something. You can stretch it like this, and it looks kind of round here, but it's not round there. I don't know what you'd call it, like the Shell gasoline sign, or the Gulf gasoline sign. And now it looks like an Advil. So it went from being a Tylenol to being an Advil. So again, you can rotate it, and you can rotate it in the same three axes, beep, 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 and whatever. All right, so that was the sphere. Next one is hemisphere, and it's half a sphere. So it's round on one side and flat. So what are the kind of things you can make with that? You can make a basket, all kinds of neat stuff you could make. Turn it over, make a basket out of it. Or you can make the top of the ice cream cone. if you want to delete it, you got to select it first. Next one is the torus. Okay, torus is kind of cool. So, and torus is the one that when you res it doesn't look anything like what it did in the little panel. So if you notice in the panel, it looks like a ring, but when you res it, it looks like a mug or something. That's because I couldn't find my thing, so that tells you about the tabs at the top here. So if you have the Create tab selected at the very top of your Edit panel, then you have this menu at the top, and you can't move it or anything. So you need to go to this one, which is the Edit tab, and then you can use the handles. You can also use this, which is a hand, and it gives you a hand, and you can grab things and you can move them around. I hate that. I don't use it because it's so imprecise and things. It drives me crazy. But you have three. You can move, lift, or spin, but I say don't ever do that. And then this is for the camera and looking at it. I don't play with that either. I use my camera controls. So anyway, this is move. And what's the last one over here? Land. Oh, that's to bulldoze land. I never use that. So it's between these two. This is to create them, and this is to edit them. So if you're ever wondering why you can't edit it and you have this panel here instead, it's because you need to click on that. All right, so here we go. The reason why it looks like it does and it doesn't look like it did in that picture is because it's been stretched tall. And so to change that, you just kind of stretch it back down. And now it looks like a donut. So, I watched a Blender video on how to make a donut. It took weeks. I just made a donut in Second Life in 10 seconds. Okay, I know it's not the same. So there you go. Now you have a donut. And you can stretch it. And then if you do, it becomes, again, it's round because now it's the Y and the Z axis are the same. And if you change those, don't ask me why. Don't ask me why they changed the orientation on this. They changed the orientation on it from being X and Y. It's now Y and Z, and X is the vertical one. So I don't know why. I wish they hadn't done that, but they did. So that's the way it is. All right, so let's delete that one. And then we'll go back to the last one, no, there's still a few more. This one is a, what is it called? Tube. And there you go. Looks like a tube. Now this really is good for a pipe, but you can make this using a cylinder. There's a way to cut a hole out in the middle when you use the cylinder. But there's benefits to using this as well. So same thing. You can stretch it, you can move it, you can rotate it. And then the last of the ones that are useful is this one, which is called a ring. And you'll notice the difference between the torus and a ring is really that the torus has rounded sides and the ring has flat sides. Right? So the sides are flat, but both of them are hollow on the inside. So this, you can use this for all kinds of things. You can get creative with it. So anyway, just to show you really quick how you can use these primitives to make something. So we're going to make an ice cream cone because that's what I was thinking. Oh yeah, I know. Somebody just pointed out I didn't show you the tree. There's a tree. Okay. I don't know. What does a tree look like? I res tree, boom. Okay. I don't even see a tree. So, whoa. I have a hole in my floor somehow. Okay. Oh, I see what I did. I grabbed that floor segment and I moved it sometime. I don't know when. But that's not your problem. All right, so that's a tree. I don't use it, and that's grass. I don't use it, so. Okay, I'm going to show you how to make it really, wow, that's loud. A really quick ice cream cone. So we're going to start with the cone, res a cone, and then we're going to flip it over. We're going to stretch it, make it a little taller. Then we're going to res a hemisphere. And we're going to pull it. And we want to line these two things up. The easy way to do it is you just see how big this is. You look at the size And the circle on this is 0.5 by 0.5, and this one is 0.5. So they're the same size. So I can align them. There's an align function up here, which we'll talk about in another video. There's an align function because I have to learn how to use it. I've been doing this 13 years or more, and I still don't know how to use the align function because you don't really need to. So you can align by snapping to the grid, and that's what we're going to do. So you move this one, and you're going to snap it to a grid point. So I'm going to put it at 102 meters. Grab this one, and then snap it to the same 102 meters. Then rotate your camera around so you're looking at it from the side. And then you're going to rotate this one to, pick a grid, it doesn't matter, 189. And then you're going to pull this one to the same 189. And you notice that the hemisphere is cutting through the cone. That's because it's too low. So I'll pull it up until they just touch, like so. And you have ice cream cone. Ta-da! And that's the art of building things. So you have to use your imagination and think, what can I make using these primitive shapes? How can I take some idea that I have, like a car or a house or an airplane, and what primitive shapes should I use to be able to simulate that building? And so for this, I did an ice cream cone, and I did it into two little shapes. Now, they're not linked together. If you want to link them together, you just select both of them and click link. And now it's one object, and they're linked together. Ta-da! Anyway, so that's going to end today's video. We covered all the different basic primitives, and then the three things that you can do with them. And from those things, from the primitive shapes and those three things, you can build almost anything. So you have move, rotate, and stretch. All right, so that concludes this video, and next time we'll get into more detail and show you what some of the ways that you can manipulate these objects even more. Like you can hollow them out, you can cut them, you can taper them, you can stretch them in weird ways and bend them to get even more kind of cool shapes out of what you get from just the primitives. And we'll talk to you guys next time. Have a good one.